See everybody tonight. Appreciate the presence of everyone. It's got a corner of my eye, Gary. I just caught you over there. Good to see Gary out with us tonight, and appreciate again the presence of everyone this evening. We're in this study trying to make application of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, talking about how God defines love, and we're making specific application to the family relationships that we find ourselves in. And so that's been our study over the past several weeks. We'll continue that. We're going to be in Lesson 5, the very beginning of Lesson 5 for the first time in the entire series. I actually finished a class lesson in a nice clean spot to come back and start the next lesson on the next service. So glad to see everybody this evening, and we'll here in just a moment get back into this discussion. But if you would, before we begin, let's have a word of prayer together. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the day that you've given us, the blessings of life that you've bestowed upon us. We are mindful of your love, your watch care for us. We're thankful that you have been with those who've been facing health crises and challenges. We just pray your continued blessings upon them. We are appreciative of how you give us your wisdom and you share with us the great message of your love. And we pray that you would give us the courage to make application of these things, particularly to our families. Help us to grow in your wisdom as it guides us in all aspects of life. Strengthen us tonight. Be with us as we study your word. And we pray all these things through thy Son's name. Amen. So let me jump back in. We haven't read verses together out of 1 Corinthians 13 for a while. We've been kind of taking the pieces as we've looked at them. But let me back you up. Let's just read a little bit of it together as we get into our study this evening and remind ourselves of the overall thought process of the Apostle Paul. If you recall, in verse 31 of chapter 12, he says, fire away. Okay. You got a question out of lesson 4, in other words. Okay, go ahead. Take me back. You're fine.
Mental abuse, sexual abuse, where am I missing something? Where does God stand?
And I can talk about that a little bit in this lesson because we're going to get into Matthew 19 a little bit in lesson 5. We're going to talk about some of those things. If I could put your question off to then, I think I can tie it. And I hope I get there tonight. And if I don't, if it gets late in the lesson and it doesn't look like I get to it tonight, I'll stop and it'll give me time to think a little bit too about the best. So here's the quick answer. I'm trying to figure out whether I want to wait or just answer it. So here's all I know. The Bible gives only one exception for divorce. For divorce. I think that's where I need to be clear. It only gives one exception for divorce, which is fornication. I think the Bible gives illustrative examples that if my life's in harm's way, Apostle Paul had his life in harm's way, and they put him in a basket and let him out over a wall. Jesus, on one occasion, told his disciples not to take any weapons with them on their first commission, but when he sends them out later again, he says, make sure you take a what? A sword, right? Make sure you take. Well, I only know one reason why you tell a disciple to take a sword with them, and it's to defend themselves. I can't come up with any other logical explanation for that, of why Jesus, on the first one, he wanted them to trust, right? Have faith. You don't need to take anything. Don't take a second pair of clothes. Don't take any extra shoes. Don't take any money. Don't take anything. Just go to town to town to town, and they'll take care of you when you get there. And if they don't, shake the dust off and go to the next town. That was his early commission. But later, when he sends them back out, that time he tells them to take certain things, and a sword was one of them. And I'm just trying to illustrate it real quick, that I believe the Bible does illustrate the right to protect oneself and a child, and to make sure that no harm continues to come. And that may mean I have to leave this situation. I may have to distance myself physically. Does that give a right for divorce? I can't say that because I don't have a passage for that. I've got a passage for get out of there. I got a passage for protect yourself. I've got a passage for you don't have to stay. I mean, even 1 Corinthians 7 would give you some implication that even if an unbelieving spouse decided they weren't putting up with all the extra criticism and they left, the idea I see there is you don't have to just, well, I guess I'm going to leave the Lord too and go where you go. You're not bound in that way. He didn't say you could divorce them over it. He just said if they decide to leave, they leave, and there's, you can't force them to stay, and you can't leave the Lord. My point in answer to your question is there's a difference between saying somebody has a right to put away their marriage and getting away from a harmful, abusive, hurtful situation. Those are two different things. And to put away, divorce, has but one allowance in Scripture that I can read. To get away or out of harm's way has various examples of how people did that during biblical times. By the way, even Jesus did that when they began to pursue him too early in the process, and he just kind of melts his way into the crowd and escapes the hands of the people that were trying to do him harm because he wasn't ready to go to the cross yet. So we see various examples. Does that answer it? No, I get you. Any other thoughts about lesson 4? And I may come back. We'll talk more about that when we get to it in lesson 5. But that wasn't necessarily exactly what we're going to see in this text. So though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity or love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. And those were our early lessons, right? That was the early message that we studied out of this text, is that love is profitable when I apply it and use it and make ready of it. Life becomes unprofitable when love isn't the motivator. And that was our earliest study in this series. Charity suffers long, or it's patient, it's kind. Love doesn't envy. It doesn't vaunteth itself up. It does not puff itself up. It doth not behave itself unseemly. It seeketh not her own. Is not easily provoked, and thinketh no evil. That was our last study, right? How love depleting things like selfishness and pride and anger. And we talked about how those things rob families of the love that God desires. Then the conversation turns a little bit in verse 6, because he gives us a contrast, right? He says, it rejoiceth not in what? In iniquity. What's the iniquity mean, by the way? Sin. And sometimes we might see the word lawlessness in some transgressions. Iniquity is, so love doesn't rejoice in sin, but it rejoices in what? In truth. It rejoiceth in truth, and that's lesson 5. How do we find joy in truth? How do family relationships exercise themselves in such a way that they can bring joy and happiness into that home environment, and be sure that happens via honest and truthful and right ways? And that's what I want to share with you beginning tonight. So we need to appreciate that if truth produces love that leads to joy, then what's deceit and dishonesty bring? That's not a trick question. It brings the opposite, right? It brings the opposite. A lot of struggles within family relationships are that just simply because people aren't being honest in the relationships. They speak deceitfully. They're not honest. They don't tell the truth. They lie. They'll lie about financial things. They'll lie about places they've been. They'll lie about. And when there's deception in marriage relationships, when there's deception in parent-to-child relationships. You know, children, all of us, growing up, I just characterized you, and that's probably not fair, but we probably all had a moment, right, where we tried to get away with something, and we told kind of the truth, or maybe we told something that wasn't even remotely close to the truth. And how did generally that work out for us? Yeah, not very well. It may have worked fine for the moment until the what? Yeah, until the truth came out, right? And then all of a sudden, because the lie and the deceptiveness and the dishonesty has now come to the forefront, there ain't much love in that moment, right? That's a hard time to find the right kind of love in that situation. So joy and love are tied to honesty in family relationships. And we almost think of truth and honesty as kind of like these commands, and love and joy as these emotional kinds of intangible things. But they really do go more hand in hand than we realize. And when there's honesty and truth, and people are upright with one another, joy and love can be the result of that. And at the end of the day, if I really love my spouse, if I really love my children, if I love my parents, if I love my siblings, if I love my brothers and sisters in Christ, why would I want to what? Why would I want to lie? Why would I want to lie to them? If I claim I love them, if I claim they're important to me, if I claim that relationship is vital and of the utmost of priorities to me, then what would ever lead me to think that it would be okay to lie in that environment? Lies aren't love. Being dishonest isn't loving. And I think sometimes, and we'll talk a little bit about marriage relationships here in a little bit, but sometimes maybe we even convince ourselves that lying will spare somebody some hardship or some challenge. I've been in circumstances where I felt like, at minimum, withholding all the truth from somebody would be the best option for them, and then it comes back to haunt you later. When you thought you were protecting someone, you thought you were helping them by withholding the fullness of truth from them, and then when that truth ultimately is revealed, then now you got a bigger issue than you would have had if you just told the truth to begin with. I'm just trying to illustrate to us tonight that love just wants truth. Love wants honesty. And when the honesty's there and the truth is there, the love will follow it and the joy will follow it. Good things will happen as it relates to that. Let's add a text to that conversation. Proverbs 15, verse 17. This is like, if you've ever paid attention to me at all, which you don't have to, by the way, but this is like one of my most favorite texts. Are you allowed to have favorite Bible verses? This is one of them. And it's a weird one, right, for me to say that. There's so many great texts. Well, it's all great text, I get that. But there's so many things that might come to mind. If I asked you for a quick rundown of your kind of memory verse kinds of things that you think of quickly, I don't know that Proverbs 15:17 might not come to your mind, but it does to me because I just like the sentiment of it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. And if anybody's heard me preach lessons that use this text, you'll hear me say something like this. Let me give you that in the Hillbilly translation. The Hillbilly translation reads that as follows. It's a whole heap better to eat soup, beans, and cornbread where there's love than to have filet mignon every night where there's hatred and dishonesty and a lack of truth. That's the messaging of Proverbs 15:17. That's what he's trying to get us to understand. Better is better is little, right? Just a few herbs. Better a dinner of herbs where love is present than the best things in the world where there's no love that permeates that home. Anybody like to buy your kids things? Am I the only guilty one? Notice I'm being honest with you. I struggle with that. I've probably done too much at times. They don't believe that. Kids don't believe that. But and that comes from various reasons. I won't dig into all that, but you all knew my upbringing. You knew my circumstance. I was 11 and a half years old when Dad was diagnosed with cancer. I was just a kid, and growing up in those days was really, well, in all honesty, was made a lot easier because of you, because of this church. But I knew what it was like to go to the Murphy Mart, and you didn't head to the shoe department. You headed to that bin, right? You headed to that bin, and that's where you found your school shoes. I'm just trying to remind you that. So it's hard for me. It's a big temptation for me. Not when my kids were little, in particular. It's even worse sometimes as they're adults. But anyway, that's another story. But to not want to overdo. And my point is, it's okay to give nice gifts, and it's okay to want to do for our children. But there were times where what my children needed most was not stuff. They needed me. They needed me. They needed to know their dad loved them. That was far more important than any type of shoe I could put on their feet or any type of clothing that I could put on their backs. To know their parents loved them, it was far more important than providing extravagant gifts and things of that sort. And that's what we've got to remind ourselves. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is. What's your focus? And if I sacrifice love, joy, peace, happiness, if I sacrifice those things in the family environment so that I can provide designer clothing and the nicest, things that they can, electronically or whatever it might be, then I've sacrificed too much. Then I've given up too much. If all they know from me is that he's a great gift giver, but not necessarily one who brought love and joy into the home environment, then I failed them. And I'm trying to speak harshly here, but I'm just trying to generate thought here. What's the primary? And this text reminds me of what the primary is. And I used to remember when I was let me rephrase that. When I was a young husband and a young father, and I would hear you all say things to me like, "Don't blink." And I blinked, and my youngest is 21. Right? The opportunity to produce love, joy, and peace in that home is fleeting. It's fleeting. So we need to encourage. Now, maybe those days are past. Many people sitting in these pews right now, those days in some ways are past. They're in many ways past for me. But if we can encourage others in the right ways to focus their homes on love and joy rather than things. And we've all heard and know the example of that, right? You buy them the $100 gift, or in modern times with inflation, the $500 gift, and they play with the thing for 5 minutes and the what? The box the rest of the day. And it's a great example and reminder for us that they probably don't need the things as much as they need us. And that's important. Truth. Be honest about that. Be truthful. And make an effort to be sure that we're bringing joy and love into that home environment and not just the stuff that we think it needs. Your thoughts? Nobody else willing to walk out on that limb with me tonight, huh? I get it. So let's talk a little bit about now what was brought up earlier. Because it's worth reminding ourselves of and making sure we understand the principles of God when it comes to the marriage relationship and how He's governed it. And I think that's an important part of this conversation, by the way. As God governs it, right? We can't have marriage relationships governed by human wisdom, because it will go awry. We have to make sure our marriage relationships are governed by God's wisdom, His construct, His idea. So notice what's happening. I think sometimes we look at Matthew 19 and we jump straight to the what Jesus says, and we forget to look and make sure we understand why He said it. He's asked a question, and I didn't put it in your notes, but hopefully you went back and read a couple of the verses ahead. But He said in verse 1, "It came to pass that when Jesus had finished these sayings, He departed from Galilee and came into the coast of Judea beyond Jordan. Great multitudes followed Him, and He healed them there. The Pharisees also came unto Him, tempting Him, and saying unto Him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause?" Now what's interesting here, by the way, is, and I'm not going to dive down, because I think we dive down that road too far sometimes, some fellows do, with trying to understand what schools of law were in existence under the Jewish community, and sometimes we can get so bogged down in that kind of conversation about the various schools of law and why Jesus might have said this or that we miss His point. His point is very basic and simple if we just appreciate what He says. So He said, the Pharisees come and they basically are trying to trap Him, because they know either way He answers this, He's wrong in somebody's eyes in the community. If He answers, no, it's not lawful for every reason, He's going to upset one segment. If He says, yes, you can put away for every cause, He's going to upset another segment. They're trying to trap Him. So He answers and said to them, verse 4, "Have ye not read?" What I love about that phrase is basically saying, don't you know the answer? It's kind of what He's saying, right? Don't you know the answer? Have you not read that He which made them at the beginning made them male and female? What's Jesus do? He doesn't really, in some senses, even answer the question Himself. Who's He point to? He points to His Father. Yeah. He says, have you not read that in the beginning? Have you not read the Genesis account of what God did when He created men and women, when He created male and female, and said, He created, notice that line, that chronological path. He created them male and female in the beginning, and said, the sentence hasn't stopped yet, "For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh." Question mark. They pose a question. He answers the question with a question. It's not unusual for Him, right? He does that on multiple occasions when He really believed they should know the answer to this, but they're just trying to trap Him. He'll answer a question with a question. And He said, the reason, or a result, I should say, of Him creating the male and female is they should leave father and mother, cleave to his wife, and they two shall become what? One. Two become one. Have you not read from the Genesis account how God created male and female, and though male and female would join themselves and take two and make them one? Wherefore, verse 6, they are no more twain, two, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not what? Man put asunder. That's the law, right? That's the command of God. God created them male and female. He told them when they joined themselves in marriage, they should leave father and mother, cleave to his wife, and two people become one. Two become one flesh. And because of that, when God has bound them into this marriage relationship, let not man pull it asunder. Because think about that. If God on one hand says, you two become one flesh, but then turns around and says, for every cause, it's okay to tear your what? tear your own flesh. Right? That's the imagery. Two become one, but to just put away and sever those relationships for any cause would be as if God said, you become one flesh, but go ahead and rip your own flesh apart for any reason, any purpose you want. He said, no. The law is, let not man do that. Don't do that. Let not man put it asunder. That's the instruction that God gave. Love honors the blessing of marriage. That's what love does. It's hard, right? Because you have these conversations and you say, well, what if I don't love anymore? Well, I get it. That can happen. People's behaviors can change. Their attitudes about things can change. What you thought you were headed, where you thought you were heading in this marriage you thought it was going this way, and then at some point, somebody in that relationship changed their thinking. Maybe they were dishonest. Maybe they weren't telling the truth about things. Maybe they weren't bringing much joy or happiness into that environment. Whatever it might be. And we struggle, right? My challenge is, though, that he doesn't give any such clause for that here. Jesus doesn't give any cause, any reason, I don't love them anymore, cause here. In fact, up to verse 6, he doesn't give what? He doesn't give any reason. Up to verse 6, it's just don't do it. That's the overwhelming command of God. Don't do it. But there's a reason behind it. So go back into the Genesis account again. Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. And the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him an helpmeet for him. God created them male and female. God said when they come together in marriage that they two become one flesh. All that conversation Jesus has in this narrative. And what I want us to write, because that's where Jesus points them to in Matthew 19. He points them back to Genesis 2. And in verse 18, we're reminded in that conversation that God says, listen, I didn't create male and female to be adversarial. I created male and female to be fit for each other. I didn't create them to be contrary. I created them to be fitly meant to be able to take two people and make them one person. That was how I created them. And I think sometimes we don't honor how God designed it that way, purposed it that way. And we almost view it as a struggle, as a conflict. And we're missing the point if we do that. Our spouses should be viewed as suited to me. God designed them to be able to be suited together. And that'll produce the kind of love and joy that we need to have in those relationships. Now, I get it. We can talk more about Matthew 19 before we're done, but one of those two people that joined themselves in one flesh may decide, I don't want to be one flesh, and they tear their own flesh apart. It happens. And the Bible will address how to handle that. But we've got to be focused on, what am I doing to bring love and joy into that relationship? And I want to do that because it's honorable. It's the right thing, an honorable thing, and it's best for me when I work diligently towards that end. In Proverb 18, in verse 22, here's another one, right? Better dinner verbs is where love is, and stalled ox and hatred therewith. Great text. Here's another one. whoso findeth a wife findeth the old ball and chain. And that sounds horrible when you read it as if it came out of Scripture, doesn't it? And yet we say that kind of stuff, right? We say that kind of silliness, and my fear is sometimes our spouses may hear us say that kind of stuff to the point where they actually begin to believe it. He doesn't think anything more of me than he's just attached to me and he can't go anywhere else because he's attached. She doesn't really love me because she just thinks of me as somebody that she made a vow to one day, and that's all there is to this relationship anymore. Be careful. We may think our words are harmless. We may think our words don't sting or don't hurt or don't have repercussion or don't lower the love and joy that we should be producing in our relationships. And I'm trying to encourage us to realize that they do. And this is how we ought to be talking, men. This is how we ought to be talking about our wives. You know, not that, not the thorn in my flesh. No, she is my flesh. I found something great. I found a good thing. I found favor from the Lord. The way sometimes I hear husbands talk about their wives, you would be convinced that they believe God did them a disfavor by the way they speak. We've got to be careful, right? Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing and obtaineth favor from the Lord. And again, I'm harder on husbands than I am on wives, but men, she needs to know that, right? She needs to hear that in some form or fashion. She needs to see it in the way that I conduct myself, the things that I want her to know she's loved. And if she's viewed or seen or led to believe that she's no more than a servant inside a household that takes care of these little people that are in the house, and right, that's not going to promote much love and joy. Our wives need to know that when I found them, and I tell folks all the time, you picked them. God didn't make you pick them. God didn't force you to pick them. God didn't make you do anything. You picked them. So treat our spouses as having found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And they need to hear us talk that way. They need to see our actions that way. And there's all kinds of ways I could illustrate that, but there's lots more to the lesson we could talk about. Your thoughts, I'll pause. Guys, you're setting me up. You're just making me say it all.
I've learned a lot. I'd probably say in the last 15 years, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
Read back through the vows. You signed up for it.
Yeah. You made a vow to it. and that's one of the things that it's interesting, Doug, you mentioned that too, because I think in modern times there's been less and less of a focus on vows. And I think the reason why there's been less and less of focus on vows is because people don't want to be committed to it. You know what I mean? They don't want to honor it, and so they just prefer not to. At least there's a level of honesty in the fact that I don't want to take this vow because I'm not committed to it. But the truth is, if you choose to join yourself into marriage, God says you're making a vow whether you say it or not, because God's joining you together. But again, the way we speak about that will determine whether there's joy and love in that environment or not. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. Do you really know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And if you look around, I don't think a lot of people do. Sometimes. They got no clue.
Yeah. Because they haven't looked at what God said about it. Yeah. And the truth is that you do. There is a learning curve, right? And you heard me talk a couple weeks ago about the fact that you don't just the day after you're married, just by osmosis, gain all the things that you need to know. But yet we didn't just commit to it, but I committed to bring love into that relationship. I committed to bring joy into that relationship. I've made a vow to build this relationship in the right ways. And that's what I wanted to strengthen us in this part of our study. Be truthful in that endeavor. Sorry, I jumped ahead on that, and I shouldn't have. Let me go back, because I want to just look a little further. It wasn't in your notes, but I want to make sure that we look at the little bit of rest of Matthew chapter 19. So, God's law, you made a vow, two became one, let not man put asunder. Here's their response, verse 7. They say to him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? By the way, is that true? No, I'm not tricking you. Yeah, shake your, yeah, he did. He did. He got frustrated with the behaviors of the people and was trying to figure out a way to govern it. How are we going to govern these situations? And so to govern the behaviors of the people, he created these rules came as to how they would do that. So these folks that felt like they had Jesus trapped, well, that failed the first time. Can a man put away his wife for any cause? Jesus never said the words no, but what did he say? He said no. He said no. Let not man put asunder. He didn't say no, but he did say no. He said, let not man put it asunder, and he based that out of Genesis. So they asked this question, well, then why did Moses do it? He said unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts. Moses suffered you to put away your wives because you were going to do it anyway, and he had to figure out a way to govern the situation because you had hardened your hearts to what God actually wanted. But what I love about how Jesus ends that is it really doesn't matter what Moses did because from the beginning it was not so. From the beginning it was not so. What I love about what Jesus does here in Matthew 19, by the way, friends, is simply this. He knows there's been a whole host of history from the book of Genesis to the life of Jesus. There has been a vast swath of history, both of Jewish history and their traditional ways of handling things through the Mosaic law and through other measures they had created on their own. The Gentile world was doing anything and everything it wanted to do. And rather than Jesus just saying, well, I tell you what, we're going to work on something new. No, Jesus said, I'm going to take you back to the original. I'm taking you back to the original, taking you back to the beginning. I say unto you, verse 9, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be, and this is key, except it be for, what's the word? Fornication. Some translations may use the word sexual immorality. Except it be for fornication. And shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery. Here's, to me, vital in this text. Are fornication and adultery the same thing? No. The answer to that question is no. They are not the same thing. Notice, somebody committed fornication, allowing somebody to remarry, without that resulting in what? Adultery. They're two different things. Why is that important? Well, sometimes I hear people say, well, he divorced her because she committed adultery. No. That sounds semantical, but it isn't semantical. The only exception to put away a spouse is for what? Fornication, sexual immorality. That's the exception. The result, when somebody marries somebody who is still bound to a spouse, the result of that is what? Adultery. That's the difference. Fornication is a physical, sexual immoral act. Why is that the exception? He doesn't really say necessarily. I think we can understand it because that's a violation of the one flesh that this marriage joined itself in. Fornication has introduced another body, pardon my bluntness with you tonight, but it introduces another body into the one flesh relationship. Jesus says when that happens, you are permitted to put that spouse away, and if you remarried after doing so, I have released that bond and you will not be in adultery by remarrying. He doesn't grant that to the fornicator. He doesn't grant that to the any cause person. The only person that he grants that to in this text is the one who is putting away their spouse because that spouse committed fornication, introducing another person physically into this relationship. And Jesus says you can put away for that cause. But adultery is about the covenant. Adultery is about the covenant. How do I know that? Well, just go back in the Old Testament. How many times did did God speak through the prophets and tell the people, you are committing adultery? How were they committing adultery? They weren't committing fornication. Well, they may have been, but not in relationship to God. They were committing adultery against God because they were breaking His covenant. They're breaking His covenant. He had made a covenant with them, and when they broke it, He would say, "Oh, adulterous what? Generation. Oh, adulterous generation." Why? That didn't have anything to do with sexual immorality. It had everything to do with the fact that they were breaking the covenant. Do we have a power outage? That bell's not going to ring. Let's just keep going. Let's see how long they go. I got a few things I want to say anyway. But we are past time. But that's the issue, right? And we can't get those mixed up because, and here's partly why. There's another text that talks about if a man looketh upon a woman and lust after her, he commits what? He commits adultery in his heart. I've heard folks look at that text and say, so I can put them away because they committed adultery in their heart. No. Jesus didn't give adultery as the exception. Adultery is the result of extra marriages so you have broken the bond in your heart. That's what he's saying. A man who looketh after a woman to lust after her committeth adultery in his heart. He's breaking the bond in his heart. He didn't break it in its physical form. He broke it in his heart. Fornication is a physical act, and it's the only exception I know the Bible gives. Adultery is the result when people that are divorced get remarried. That's what happens. That's when adultery comes into the picture. And he gave one exception to that, when fornication was part of that first marriage. And I think that's important if we're going to understand. Now, is it hard? Yes. And do I feel awful for people that get caught up, and it's particularly innocent people that get caught up in that? Absolutely. And it's heart-wrenching. It's heart-wrenching to watch the behaviors of people who claim to love, who claim to have made vows, who have claimed, and just throw it away as if it meant nothing to them. And my heart aches for those situations. But many a time, folks are looking for a way out rather than working diligently to find a way to interject love and joy back into that relationship. The world says the easiest path is to find a way out. Any reason, any cause, all exceptions are fine. But the challenge God gives us is we became one flesh. We need to work more diligently, not figuring out ways to separate it, but figure out better ways to keep it together and bring joy and love back into it. And we can come back to that. I didn't give you a chance to say much, but I'll come back to that thought Sunday morning.